The sun had just set over the vast expanse of the American plains, casting a golden glow over the endless stretch of highway. Jack, a seasoned trucker, was on his way to deliver a shipment of electronics to a major retailer in Los Angeles. He had been driving for hours, and the monotony of the road was starting to get to him. As he tuned into his favorite radio station, a strange broadcast caught his attention. A low, gravelly voice spoke of a phantom route, a path that only appeared at night, leading to places unknown. Intrigued, Jack decided to investigate. He pulled over at the next truck stop, a small, dimly lit place that seemed to exist in a world of its own. The attendant, an old man with a knowing glint in his eye, leaned in close. "You're talking about Route 13, he whispered. "Few have taken it and returned to tell the tale." Jack's curiosity was piqued. He filled up his tank and set off into the night, following the cryptic directions the attendant had given him. The GPS led him deeper into the heart of rural America, where the roads became narrower and the darkness seemed to swallow everything in its path. As he drove, the landscape around him began to change. The trees grew taller, their branches twisting into grotesque shapes that seemed to reach out to snag at his truck. The radio crackled with static, and then, suddenly, the voice was back. "Welcome to Route 13, it said. "You'll never leave." Jack tried to shake off the feeling of unease, telling himself it was just his imagination playing tricks on him. But as he continued down the phantom route, strange things began to happen. His headlights would flicker, and for a moment, he'd see figures standing by the side of the road, their faces obscured by shadows. One figure in particular caught his attention. A woman in a long coat, her face deathly pale, would appear and disappear in the blink of an eye. Jack tried to follow her, but she always seemed to vanish into thin air. As the night wore on, Jack encountered more and more bizarre occurrences. His truck would stall, and when he got out to check, he'd find strange symbols etched into the side panels. The radio would play eerie melodies that seemed to come from nowhere. The hours blurred together as Jack drove deeper into the heart of Route 13. He began to question his own sanity. Was he really seeing these things? Or was it just the exhaustion playing tricks on him? Suddenly, his truck sputtered and died. Jack was plunged into darkness, the only sound the creaking of the trees and the distant hum of a radio broadcast. He stepped out, calling for help, but there was no response. As he stood there, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was the woman in the long coat, her eyes black as coal. "You should not have come here," she whispered, before vanishing into the night. Jack stumbled back to his truck, determined to escape the phantom route. He managed to start the engine and turn the truck around, racing back the way he came. The darkness seemed to close in around him, but he didn't dare look back. Finally, he saw the lights of civilization in the distance. He pulled into a truck stop, his heart still racing. The attendant looked at him with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "You've been on Route 13, he said, without needing to ask. Jack nodded, still trying to process what had happened. The attendant leaned in close. "You're lucky to have made it back. Not everyone does." From that day on, Jack never spoke of Route 13 again. He knew that some secrets were better left unspoken, and some roads were better left untraveled. But every now and then, late at night, he'd hear the voice on the radio whispering, "Welcome to Route 13. You'll never leave." Months went by, and Jack tried to put the experience behind him. However, he couldn't shake off the feeling that he was being watched. He started noticing strange occurrences around him. tools would go missing, and he'd find cryptic messages on his truck's windshield. One night, as he was driving through a familiar route, he saw the woman in the long coat again. This time, she was standing by the side of the road, her eyes fixed on him. Jack slammed on the brakes, but when he looked back, she was gone. Realizing that he couldn't escape the phantom route's influence, Jack decided to confront his fears. He returned to the truck stop where he first heard about Route 13, determined to uncover its secrets. The attendant was gone, but a note on the counter read, "Meet me at the old warehouse on Route 13. Come alone." Jack hesitated, but his curiosity got the better of him. He drove to the warehouse, his heart pounding in his chest. Inside, he found a room filled with old radios and maps. In the center of the room, a single radio played the same eerie melody he had heard on Route 13. Suddenly, the woman appeared beside him. "You should have stayed away," she whispered, before everything went black. When Jack came to, he was back in his truck, parked by the side of the road. The sun was rising, and everything seemed normal. But as he looked down at his hands, he saw that they were covered in the same strange symbols he had found on his truck during his journey on Route 13. Jack realized that he had been given a second chance, a warning to never speak of Route 13 again. He drove away, leaving the mystery of the phantom route behind him. But deep down, he knew that he would never be free from its haunting presence. Greg, a seasoned trucker with more than a decade on the road, was no stranger to long stretches of desolate highways. It was late, the moon barely visible in the sky, and the road ahead stretched endlessly in front of him. His rig's headlights pierced the inky blackness, casting eerie shadows across the deserted landscape. The air was still, and the silence was oppressive, only interrupted by the rhythmic hum of the engine. As he drove through the empty stretch of desert highway, he fought to stay awake. It had been hours since he last saw another car, and the isolation of the road weighed heavily on him. Greg rubbed his eyes, the fatigue creeping up on him. He took a sip of coffee from the thermos beside him, but the bitter taste did little to shake the weariness. He glanced at the clock, 1:45 a.m., another 3 hours to go before his next stop. Just a few more hours on the road, he told himself. The miles passed, the world outside reduced to an endless blur of black. But then, as if out of nowhere, something caught his attention. A flicker, something moving at the edge of his headlights. Greg's heart skipped a beat. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel and squinted into the dark. There it was again, a figure, tall and thin, standing in the middle of the road. His breath caught in his throat. For a split second, he thought it was a mirage, a trick of his tired mind. But no, there it was, clear as day, just standing there. It wasn't moving, it was just there. Greg's pulse quickened. What the hell? He leaned closer to the windshield, trying to get a better look, but the figure didn't seem to change. It just stood there, motionless, bathed in the eerie glow of his truck's headlights. He slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching as the truck skidded to a stop. His heart was pounding now, a mixture of fear and confusion swirling inside him. He stared at the figure. It was tall, impossibly tall, with long, flowing black clothes that seemed to blend into the night. Its head was down, obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. It was like something out of a nightmare, standing there in the middle of nowhere without a care in the world. Greg's mind raced. Should he call the cops? No, he thought. It was probably some weirdo playing a prank. Maybe it was a hitchhiker, but who the hell would stand out in the middle of the desert at this hour? And if it was someone stranded, why hadn't they waved for help? He was about to roll the window down to see if the figure was in trouble, when, without warning, the figure started walking towards him. Slowly, deliberately. It didn't rush, it just walked. Greg's stomach tightened. Something wasn't right. He wasn't about to get out of the truck and find out what the hell this was. No way. His foot hovered over the gas pedal, ready to leave this place as fast as possible. But as the figure closed the distance between them, Greg froze. The figure's eyes, now visible under the brim of its hat, were dark, unnaturally dark, hollow. The air around him grew cold, the temperature dropping in an instant. The trucker's breath fogged up the inside of the cab. Then, the figure stopped, standing just a few feet from the truck. It raised its head slowly, tilting it to one side as if inspecting the truck. Greg felt his body go rigid with fear. His mouth was dry, his throat tight. He couldn't look away. The figure's face was pale, almost sickly, with a faint smile that seemed to stretch unnaturally wide. The eyes, those dark, empty eyes, they were staring straight into his soul. "Need some company?" A voice, rasping and thin, broke the silence. Greg's blood ran cold. He could barely breathe. Who was this person? What the hell did they want? The figure reached out its hand, its fingers long and spindly, almost skeletal, as it moved toward the truck's door. Greg's heart raced. The truck's lock clicked, and his hand shot down to the door, fumbling to keep it shut. Panic surged through him. The voice, now low and mocking, came again. "You're not going anywhere." Greg's mind scrambled, his instincts screaming at him to drive, to get the hell out of there. He slammed the gear shift into drive and floored the gas pedal, the truck jerking forward with a roar. But as the truck sped up, the figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching. And then, as the trucker glanced back through the rearview mirror, his stomach twisted. The figure was following him, keeping pace with the truck, its long legs moving with unnatural speed. It was keeping up, walking faster than any human could, its presence growing larger and larger in the mirror. Greg's heart pounded in his chest. He floored the pedal, the truck lurching forward with all its power. But no matter how fast he drove, the figure never stopped. It was right behind him now, so close that Greg could feel the weight of its gaze pressing down on him. He looked out to the side window. Nothing. No lights, no cars, just the endless desert. He was completely alone. The road was deserted, except for the figure, which seemed to be closing the distance between them. Greg's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He tried to speed up, but the truck was starting to feel sluggish, like the road was holding it back. The engine was sputtering. No, this wasn't happening. Not now, not here. The truck slowed, the engine whining in protest. Greg swore under his breath, slamming his fist down on the dashboard. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. The headlights flickered. The fog around them thickened. And then, as the figure moved closer, a chill crept into the truck's cabin. The temperature dropped so quickly that Greg could see his breath fogging up. His fingers were numb as he tried to grip the wheel, but they wouldn't obey him. The figure was almost there, and then the truck stopped completely. Greg's breath came in ragged gasps. The engine was dead. The figure was standing right outside the window now, its pale face pressed against the glass. Greg could hear it breathing, slow and steady, like it was savoring the moment. The trucker's chest tightened, his heart hammering in his ears. He tried the ignition again. Nothing. The figure's mouth opened slowly, its smile stretching impossibly wide, revealing rows of jagged yellow teeth. "You should have stayed off the road," the voice rasped, a low growl that made Greg's blood freeze. A shadow passed over the truck's cab, and before Greg could react, something cold and sharp pressed against his neck. It had been a long day for Jesse Carter, the kind of day that makes a trucker wonder why they keep driving for hours on end. The sun had dipped below the horizon hours ago, leaving nothing but a blanket of darkness stretching as far as the eye could see. The desert highway ahead of him was long, lonely, and empty, and Jesse couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The road was a familiar one, an isolated stretch that wound through the outskirts of Arizona, where cell service was a luxury, and miles of emptiness surrounded him. Jesse had been on the road for almost 14 hours straight, and his eyelids were starting to feel heavy. He didn't mind the solitude, but tonight was different. The quiet felt oppressive. His truck's engine hummed steadily, a constant reminder of how far he was from civilization. The radio, tuned to a country station, crackled with static, only adding to the eerie ambiance. He yawned and rubbed his eyes, wishing he could reach the next truck stop soon. The thought of a hot meal, a cold beer, and a warm bed kept him going. The only thing standing in his way was the darkness, which seemed to stretch on forever. As he looked at the road ahead, a strange feeling washed over him, a sense of foreboding that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He thought back to the message he had received earlier that day, the one that had made him uneasy. His dispatcher had been unusually insistent about the delivery, urging him to make the drop-off as quickly as possible. The delivery was to a remote location, a small farm out in the middle of nowhere. The address was old, written on a crumpled sheet of paper, and when he asked the dispatcher why the order had to be rushed, all he got was a vague answer, something about the client being in a hurry. Jesse tried to shake the feeling of unease. He wasn't one to jump at shadows, but something about this delivery felt off. The night grew darker, and the empty road stretched endlessly before him. Then, just as he thought it couldn't get any worse, his headlights flickered. He cursed under his breath and slammed his fist against the dashboard. The lights flickered again. This time, they didn't come back on. "Damn it," he muttered, slowing the truck and pulling over to the side of the road. The truck was now completely dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the dashboard. Jesse cursed again, grabbing his flashlight from the glove compartment. He stepped out of the truck into the cold desert air. The silence was deafening. There were no crickets, no wind, no sounds of animals or birds. It felt like the world had gone completely still. The beam of his flashlight illuminated the road in front of him, revealing nothing but miles of empty asphalt and barren desert. Jesse checked the truck's lights, making sure the connections weren't loose. Everything appeared normal, but there was no doubt that something felt wrong. He shivered, despite the heat of the night. Just as he was about to climb back into the truck, he heard something. A sound, faint at first, like a whisper carried by the wind. He turned around quickly, his heart racing. The noise stopped. He stood still for a moment, trying to make sense of it. There was nothing, just the stillness of the desert. Jesse shook his head, telling himself it was nothing. A coyote, maybe, or just the wind. He climbed back into the truck, started the engine, and drove off, determined to finish the delivery and get some rest. But as he drove further down the road, the feeling of being watched only intensified. The hair on his neck stood up, and he couldn't shake the sensation that someone, or something, was following him. The headlights were still out, but he was managing to navigate by the dim light of the dashboard and the occasional flicker from his truck's emergency lights. It was then that he saw it. A shadow in the distance, moving at an unnatural pace. At first, he thought it was a mirage, some trick of the desert. But as he got closer, the shadow took form. It was a figure, tall, thin, and moving with a deliberate, unnatural gait. The figure stood motionless in the middle of the road, blocking his path. Jesse slammed on the brakes, his heart hammering in his chest. The truck screeched to a halt, just inches away from the figure. The shadow didn't move. Jesse's breath caught in his throat, his eyes locked on the figure, unable to look away. It stood there, unmoving in the middle of the road. "Hey!" Jesse shouted, his voice trembling. "Move! Get out of the road!" There was no response. The figure just stood there, its form blending into the darkness. Jesse's pulse quickened. He could feel the cold sweat running down his back. He reached for the horn, but hesitated. Something about the figure felt wrong in a way that words couldn't describe. His instincts screamed at him to drive away, to speed off into the night and never look back. But his curiosity got the better of him. He honked the horn. The figure didn't flinch. Jesse's grip tightened on the steering wheel. He was about to put the truck in reverse and get the hell out of there when the figure slowly turned its head. Jesse froze. The figure's movements were jerky, unnatural, like it wasn't quite in sync with the real world. It turned its head toward Jesse, and for the first time he could see its face, pale, gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to reflect the dim light of the truck's emergency flashers. A shiver ran down his spine. He had never felt such an intense sense of dread in his entire life. Something about those eyes. They weren't human. Before he could react, the figure took a step toward the truck. Jesse slammed the truck into reverse, his foot hitting the gas pedal hard. The truck lurched backward, kicking up dust and rocks. He wasn't sure why he was so terrified, but his instincts were screaming at him to get away. He looked in the rearview mirror. The figure was following him, moving at a disturbingly fast pace, its legs long and unnaturally thin, its body stretched like it was reaching toward him. Panic set in. He hit the gas harder, but the truck felt sluggish. It wasn't responding as it should. He was going faster, but the figure was keeping up. Jesse's breath was ragged, his hands slick with sweat as he gripped the steering wheel. He glanced back at the figure, his heart pounding in his chest. It was getting closer. The truck's engine sputtered, its power draining away. "Come on," Jesse muttered under his breath, his voice rising in desperation. He was almost out of time. Just as he thought he couldn't go any faster, the truck's engine died. The truck rolled to a stop in the middle of the road, and Jesse sat frozen in fear. The headlights flickered once more, then went out entirely. For a moment, everything was still. Then, the figure was right outside his window. Jesse's hand trembled as he reached for the door handle, but before he could open it, he heard a voice, a whisper. "You shouldn't have come," it said. Before Jesse could respond, everything went dark. It was the kind of night that made even the most experienced trucker second-guess their route. The air was thick with a strange kind of humidity, not enough to feel like rain, but heavy and suffocating nonetheless. The headlights of Joe Lucky Walker's 18-wheeler illuminated the empty road ahead, stretching for miles across the isolated expanse of Route 66 in Arizona. This stretch of road had been traveled by thousands of truckers, but tonight, something felt off. Something he couldn't quite put his finger on. Joe had been driving for almost 15 years, through every type of weather, every condition you could imagine, and nothing ever fazed him. But tonight, with the clock ticking past midnight, and no other vehicles in sight, he felt an eerie stillness creeping over the highway. The radio crackled with static, refusing to stay tuned to any station for more than a few seconds, and the only sound besides the engine was the constant hum of the tires on asphalt. It was quiet, too quiet for Joe's liking. He had just picked up a load in Flagstaff, heading west to a small town called El Dorado. It wasn't on many maps, but that wasn't surprising. It was a tiny, out-of-the-way place that had been on the decline for years. Joe had driven through there once before, and even then, it had seemed like a ghost town. No people, no lights, nothing but empty buildings and the occasional stray dog. He reached for his coffee, the warmth of the cup contrasting against the chill that seemed to be seeping into the truck. Just as he took a sip, his headlights flickered. He frowned and tapped the dashboard, as if that would somehow fix it, but the light flickered again. Joe cursed under his breath and checked the controls. Everything seemed fine. No loose wires, no broken fuses. The truck lurched, as if something had jolted it from the inside. He grabbed the wheel instinctively, but the truck's movements were erratic. He felt a tug on his steering wheel, pulling him off course, as though something, or someone, was trying to force him off the road. The tires screeched against the asphalt, sending an unpleasant vibration through the truck as it veered to the right. Joe fought to keep control, but it felt like the truck had a mind of its own. His grip tightened, his heart racing, but it was no use. In the blink of an eye, the truck was off the road, plowing through the scrub and coming to a violent stop as it slammed into a patch of dirt. Joe sat frozen for a moment, trying to catch his breath. The engine sputtered, then died completely. He slammed his hand on the dashboard, cursing loudly. "What the hell?" he muttered, unbuckling his seatbelt and stepping out of the truck. The night air hit him like a wall, sharp and biting. It was completely silent outside, except for the faint whisper of the wind. The silence was suffocating. As Joe walked around the truck, he noticed something strange. The ground beneath the truck wasn't as solid as it should be. It was spongy, almost like wet soil, but when he knelt to touch it, it was dry. His flashlight beam swept across the dark landscape, landing on something glinting in the distance. He squinted and walked toward it, his boots crunching on the dry earth. The glint was from a broken metal sign, rusted and battered by the elements. He leaned down to inspect it, his fingers brushing against the words that had long since faded from the weather. El Dorado, 10 miles, the sign read. Joe looked around. He was closer to the town than he thought, but the strange part was that he hadn't seen any signs for the town before this point. There should have been a sign marking the exit. He frowned. He had driven this stretch of road 100 times, and he had never seen this sign before. Suddenly, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He wasn't alone. A sound, soft and eerie, drifted through the air. It wasn't quite a voice, but a whisper, like someone calling his name from far off, barely audible, but undeniably there. His stomach churned as his body tensed, the hairs on his arms standing up. The whisper came again, clearer this time. "Joe!" He spun around, his flashlight beam cutting through the dark. Nothing. He walked back toward the truck, his footsteps quickening as the whisper came once again, closer now, echoing in his ears. "Joe!" He bolted back to the truck, heart hammering in his chest. He slammed the door shut behind him, throwing the locks into place. The truck's engine sputtered and whined, as if responding to his panic, but nothing happened. The radio came on, its static filling the cab, before the voice spoke again. "You're not leaving, Joe." The voice was chilling, unlike anything he'd ever heard before. It was low, guttural, and distorted, like someone, or something, had been waiting for him. Suddenly, the headlights flashed back on. Joe's heart jumped in his chest, but he didn't have time to process what had just happened. His eyes darted back and forth, searching for any sign of movement. He was about to start the truck when something caught his eye. A figure, standing at the edge of the road. It was just a silhouette, but it was unmistakably tall and thin, and it was staring directly at him. Joe's pulse quickened, and instinctively he slammed the truck into gear. He tried to drive, but the truck wouldn't budge. It was as if something was holding it in place. The figure began to move toward him, slow and deliberate, its movements jerky and unnatural. Joe's hand trembled as he reached for the gear shift again, but it was no use. The truck was completely immobile. The voice came again, louder this time, as though it were inside his own head. "You can't escape, Joe. You should have stayed off Route 66. A low growl emanated from the figure, its eyes glowing faintly in the darkness, even though Joe couldn't see its face. His breath caught in his throat. His fingers were numb on the steering wheel, and then everything went dark. Eddie Grayson had been driving long hauls for 20 years, but he had never seen a night like this. The desert highway stretched endlessly in front of him, cutting through the barren landscape like an old scar. His rig, a weathered Kenworth W900, rumbled steadily beneath him, its engine a familiar comfort. The dashboard clock read 2:43 a.m., and the CB radio was silent, an unnatural hush filling the cab. Eddie was on a shortcut, a road known among truckers as the Black Mile. It wasn't on the map anymore, but veterans knew it well. It shaved nearly 50 miles off the usual route between Phoenix and Santa Fe, but no one used it. The stories varied. Some truckers said it was cursed. Others claimed the road itself was haunted, that it appeared only when it wanted to, trapping those who took it. Eddie didn't believe in that crap. He had bills to pay, and an early delivery meant a bigger bonus. As he drove deeper into the desert, the night pressed in around him. The air felt heavier. His headlights seemed weaker, barely illuminating the cracked asphalt ahead. Then, the CB radio crackled to life. "Eddie?" His grip tightened on the wheel. The voice was faint, barely a whisper beneath the static. "Breaker 19, this is Eddie. Who's calling?" Silence. He turned the dial, trying to clear the signal, but the voice returned, clearer this time. "Turn back." The hair on the back of his neck stood up. He hadn't told anyone he was taking the Black Mile. He exhaled sharply. "If this is some truck stop joker screwing around, I ain't in the mood." A burst of static hissed through the speaker, then laughter. It was wrong, stretched out, distorted, like it was coming from someone who had forgotten how to laugh. Eddie reached for the power knob to shut the radio off, but as his fingers brushed the plastic, his headlights flickered. And then he saw it, a figure standing in the middle of the road. Eddie slammed the brakes. The tires screamed as the truck skidded, but the figure didn't move. It was tall, too tall, clad in a dusty, tattered jacket, its face obscured by the shadows. The headlights struggled against the darkness, barely illuminating its skeletal frame. Then, in the space of a breath, it was gone. Eddie sat frozen, his chest rising and falling in heavy gasps. Just a trick of the eyes. Highway hypnosis. He needed coffee, maybe a cigarette. He eased his foot off the brake and pressed the gas. The truck groaned as it rolled forward, the engine sounding weaker than before. The miles dragged on, the road stretching longer than it should have. He checked the dashboard clock. 2:43 a.m. That wasn't right. He checked his phone. 2:43 a.m. His stomach twisted. He had been driving for nearly an hour, but time hadn't moved. His hands were slick with sweat. He wiped them on his jeans, glancing at the mirrors. The road behind him was empty, but something in the distance caught his eye. A pair of headlights. Relief surged through him. Another trucker. Maybe they could convoy out of this hellhole together. He reached for the CB. "Breaker 19, this is Eddie on Black Mile. Who's behind me?" Static. The lights grew closer. Too fast. The truck behind him wasn't just catching up, it was gaining. His gut screamed at him to go faster, but something felt wrong. The lights were too bright, too white, and they weren't bouncing the way headlights should. He stole another glance in the mirror, and his blood ran cold. The truck behind him had no driver. The cabin was empty, yet it barreled forward, closing the distance. Eddie's foot crushed the gas pedal. His rig roared as it surged ahead, but the phantom truck matched his speed effortlessly. The CB crackled again. "Let us in, Eddie." He couldn't breathe. The voice was inside the cab now, whispering from everywhere and nowhere at once. The headlights behind him split apart into eyes, huge, glowing eyes. Eddie screamed. The world tilted. His tires hit something. A shape, a body. No, it wasn't human. The wheel jerked violently. His truck spun out of control, the trailer whipping sideways as metal shrieked and shattered. Then, impact. Darkness swallowed everything. Eddie woke to silence. He was still in the cab, his head resting against the wheel. Blood dripped down his temple. The windshield was cracked but intact. The dashboard clock was still frozen at 2:43 a.m. Outside, the desert was wrong. The road was gone. His truck sat in an endless stretch of black sand, Beneath a sky with no stars, the air was thick, suffocating. Something moved in the distance. Figures, tall, watching, waiting. The CB radio crackled one last time. Welcome home, Eddie. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notifications, because more stories are coming. See you in the dark.